We're going to take this nice stack of wood and turn it into something sexy.
A client sent this picture and said they wanted a custom version of it. We've never made a hall tree before, but it seemed the best to build it in 3 parts. Cabinets, middle thingy, and the bench. These cabinets needed to be 30 inches tall, and my table saw is too small to get the job done. So, Sean decided to knock out some quick math to determine our best option for cutting 4 30-inch tall panels consistently. After putting his genius brain to work, it was determined we needed to use a CNC before having any fun. Don't get it twisted. CNCs are an awesome tool to have, but sometimes they're inefficient when trying to knock out multiple pieces. You could tell by how enthused we look, contemplating if it's time to upgrade to a cabinet saw. We decided to work on the rest of the cabinets for the lower bench while the CNC finished doing its thing. This is where the table saw shines, just knocking out all these pieces quickly and moving on to the next step, which is joinery. I like my grooves to sit around half the thickness of the material. Since this is 3/4 inch plywood, I set a 1/2 inch router bit to cut 3/8 of an inch deep. Using firm, consistent pressure, I ran each panel over the bit to create clean dados on one side. After each panel was cut, the fence was adjusted ever so slightly to sneak up on a nice, perfect fit. To cut the back panel grooves to fit a 1/4 inch sheet of plywood, I used a scrap piece of ply to set the distance so I could later fit cleats on the back. Each piece was ran through the table saw at the same distance before moving the fence and once again sneaking up on a perfect fit for 1/4 inch plywood. To ensure everything was ready for dry fit and glue up, Sean did a quick cleanup of the edges with a sanding sponge. We assembled the cabinets to check for fit and knocked out some shelf pin holes with this Craig jig thing. It's pretty handy for these types of projects and eliminates all the guesswork. There will be a link to it in the description as well as a lot of the other tools we found super helpful in this build. Before glue up, it's always smarter to sand and finish any hard to reach or interior portions. I've learned this the hard way a lot. Since we took our time making sure all the panels were square and all the joinery was tight with the dry fit, glue up was way less stressful than normal. I like using Titebond Extend for these applications as it has a longer open time, though it's basically Titebond 3. Here they are, just some boxes with some holes at this point. Now let's spruce them up with some vase frames. We got some 8/4 poplar, which was a little too wide for my joiner, so I ripped it to size on the bandsaw. I removed just enough to max out the space on my jointer bed to limit waste. We're milling these in a way to make 1/4 sawn boards. The face frames needed to be 1.5 inches wide, so I planed these boards to 1.5 inches. The trick to get 1/4 sawn grain from flat sawn board is how you mill it and rip it. The thickness of the board is actually the width of each frame piece. Using the table saw, we ripped multiple strips at about 7/8 of an inch, and then we brought it down to exactly 3/4 of an inch to later fit the hinges to. The drum sander made quick work of this and cleaned them up in the same process. All pieces were cut to size to match their corresponding cabinets, and we took a quick and easy route to assemble them with glue and pocket hole screws. Again, this is paint grade. These pocket holes will be completely hidden and they're more than strong enough, especially when paired with glue. To attach the face frames, I added a bead of glue around the edge of the cabinets, then pin nailed them in place with firm pressure and a 22 gauge nailer. After the glue dried, I used Bondo to fill all the nail holes and the gap line between the frames and the cabinet shells. If you've never used Bondo, wear a mask when you do. This stuff is pungent, but it works so dang good. All the cabinets were then sanded with 180 grit to even everything out and then set aside while we worked on the middle thingy. I really had no idea what I was doing. I just knew the middle thingy was basically a flat panel with cool looking side supports. This is where the CNC tends to shine. I could spend hours doing this by hand or just create a file for these 2 side pieces and knock them out real quick. They kind of looked like tall cartoon boots or something. It probably would have been a better idea to use solid maple or poplar here because applying edge banding around these curves was annoying to say the least. The edge banding was absolutely necessary here to conceal the plywood edges as they were front facing. For the center panel, I decided to save material by gluing and screwing 2 leftover pieces of plywood together. I knew this panel would be completely hidden by shiplap, so I didn't have to make it pretty, just strong. Once the panel was glued up, I cut it to size with this Craig track saw attachment thingy and set it up to screw the side supports in. I clamped the side supports in place and used pocket hole screws again to tie it all together with glue. And in the end, it actually turned out pretty decent for being an abomination. At this point, the shell of the entire hall tree has been built and set to the side, so I moved on to making the oak bench panel. Some people scoff at red oak, but it's still oak and very strong, and if finished correctly, it's gorgeous. All I did here was mill it to just under an inch thick and then move to the table saw to rip each piece to exact width, as I was looking to make a 19-inch deep bench. Using dowels to help with alignment, I glued everything up with some decent panel clamps. I did my best to match the grain as much as possible, and luckily color wasn't an issue as they were all from the same super long board. Once dry, I squared up each end to length and moved on to sanding. I always like to sand from 80 to 120 grit before adding edge profiles. A good quality 1/4 inch bit will leave an edge that barely needs sanding treatment. After adding the edge profile and sanding to 180 grit, I busted out some Rubio Monocoat. This is their natural color. It is not the same as Rubio Pure. I noticed a lot of builders like cotton white on their oak projects, but I've noticed Rubio Natural actually hides the pink undertones of red oak very well and gives it a nice neutral tan appearance. After the bench was done, I cut some drawer pieces off camera, added edge banding, and began a butt joint glue up. This is an easy way to make drawers, and I did it this way for ease as I had an idea for a stylish reinforcement. Once in clamps, I checked for square in all 4 corners and let it dry. Once dry, the butt joints were strong enough to start marking and drilling for oak dowels. I marked 4 points at 2 inches apart for these oak dowels to be placed and drilled deep enough to allow for a strong hold. Using a generous amount of glue, I plugged each hole one at a time and cut the excess away with a small handsaw. A quick sand with 180 grit sandpaper made everything flush, and since the glue was still wet, the dust from the sanding filled any imperfections. At this point, I just started jumping around the build and kinda went with the flow. Sean and I started cutting some shiplap down to size to fit the middle thingy. Since it's pre-primed, it was easy to just spray it all with a couple cans of flat farmhouse black. I desperately need a paint sprayer, but we don't have the space here. The rest of the project shell was sealed, 2 coats of Kills oil-based primer, then sanded smooth after it dried. Again, no sprayer, so we used cabinet sponge rollers to roll on the rest of the flat black paint, which took about 4 coats in total. Once all of the paint dried, I used liquid nails and a 22 gauge nailer to pin the shiplap in place. I only nailed under the groove, so no filling had to be done later on. We set all the shell pieces to the side, and I needed to make one more special drawer. Using Formica laminate and a cut-off piece of ply, I bonded them together with a healthy dose of contact cement and some serious roller pressure. This drawer will be for dog bowls, and Formica seemed to be the best choice as it allows for easy cleanup and protects from spills. I designed a 3-bowl layout, 1 for water and 2 for food. The CNC cut the bowl holder to a size where I only needed to glue and nail 1/2 inch thick oak boards to the edge. After the glue dried, I flush cut the ends with a handsaw and then sanded them smooth. After adding some more Rubio Natural, I installed it to the bench with some soft close drawer slides. An additional part of the build was making the shaker style doors. I'm just going to fly through this because it's actually pretty easy. I milled some hard maple down to size and ripped 2-inch wide strips from it. I seriously need to replace my blades because I was getting some gnarly burning during this. Using my miter gauge, I cross-cut all the pieces to size, then began ripping a groove towards the middle of each board. These grooves will hold the 1/4 inch ply panel for the bulk of the door, and it's literally just cut to size to fit within the shaker style frames. Once again, I'll piss off all the purists and use pocket holes and glue for assembly here because they're strong, they work, and they'll be covered with primer and paint. I never understood why so many woodworkers get upset with the use of pocket hole screws. I love tackling traditional joinery just as much as the next guy, but there's a time and place for everything. And pocket holes were literally used by shakers for shaker style cabinets forever ago. I'd rather finish a client's project quickly while maintaining strength, so if you don't like pocket holes, have fun spending hours on joints that literally no one will ever see ever. I primed the doors off camera and came up with a quick drawer pull idea. The client was just going to choose some from a hardware store and I wasn't having it. So with some quick thinking, oak cutoffs, and brass rod, I was able to conjure up something. Quick tip, you can cut brass rod with your miter saw, just make sure you have a high tooth count blade and cut slowly. Now I messed up here. I definitely should have used this jig to drill out the hinge pockets before I added paint. Learn from my stupidity here or you'll be caught trying to fix your finish. I secured the soft close hinges in place and realized I forgot something. The drawer faced to the dog bowl drawer. A full drawer face would hinder the doggos from getting what they need if this haul tree ever finds its way to a corner. So I used some leftover oak and created an arched top rectangle as a simple yet contrasting drawer face. Since it will also act as a drawer pull, I softened the edges with an 1/8 inch roundover bit and added some more Rubio Natural to match the rest of the piece. Once everything was attached, this is what it looked like. We really hope you enjoyed this build. Tell us what you would do different in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe for more woodworking content. Thanks for watching. Happy building.